Hi and welcome back to the course. In this video we're going to look at REST principles, and this is really important. This lecture may be slightly confusing and it's slightly abstract, and please do ask questions at any point if you have any questions at all. Let's look at what we know now about HTTP. Going to a site performs a GET request. And this normally returns HTML, but it may return other things such as text, for example, or errors. And also we can do things other than GET. We can do POST, for example. Okay, so this is what we know already. Now let's look at what a REST API is. A REST API uses those same concepts that we've looked at, GET, POST, and so on. So there's no technical things going on in a REST API. All that a REST API is, or rather all that REST is a way of thinking about how a web server responds to your request and how a web server behaves in general. It doesn't respond with just data. It responds with something called resources. Now, a resource is essentially just data, but it's a shift in the way of thinking. So we must stop thinking about we ask the server for something and the server responds with data, and now we have to start thinking about we are asking for a resource, for a thing in the server. It's very similar to object-oriented programming, so we can think of the server as having resources, and each resource is able to interact with the pertinent request. We're going to look at what the pertinent request is now. So let's say we have this GET endpoint. Our server has been programmed to be able to receive this GET request /item/chair. It also has been programmed to receive this POST request /item/chair with some extra data, such as to create a new chair, for example. It also has been programmed to accept this request, put /item/chair, presumably also with some extra data so it can create or update the chair. And also it can deal with a delete /item/chair. As you can see, all of these four requests have the same endpoint /item/chair. That's because they are all accessing the same resource, the chair element of the item resource. So this could be the item resource. And whenever we interact with an item, we know that the endpoint is going to be the same. And now we can start thinking of our interactions with the server as not individual requests, but resources. And now we can do things like get a resource, or post something to the resource, or create a resource, delete a resource, and so on. Which simplifies the way of thinking, simplifies the thought process behind these interactions, because now instead of dealing with just individual endpoints, we're dealing with something a bit larger. So once again, similar to object-oriented programming. In object-oriented programming, objects are just things that hold some data, and then some more data in the form of methods, and they have a name, and here it's really a similar thing. Another endpoint may be get/items. And now we can probably see the similarity. Items and item, probably fairly related, but it's a different endpoint, and we're no longer retrieving an individual resource. /items probably means we're retrieving multiple items. Therefore, it cannot be the item resource. It must be something like an item list resource, for example. And in this section, we're going to look at creating these two programmatically. Another key feature of REST is that it is stateless, or that it's supposed to be stateless. Now, stateless is always really confusing initially, but all that it means is that one request cannot depend on any other requests. And again, this may be confusing. As we program, this will make more sense. So the server only knows about the current request and not about any previous requests. Let me give you a couple examples. For our first example, imagine we create a chair item. We create a request that is post /item/chair, and presumably that creates a chair. The server doesn't know the item now exists. It has created it, it has put it in a database, and then it's forgot about it because it's sent us a response back. It said item created, for example, and then it's forgotten that the item exists, but it is in the database. When we do get /item/chair, the server cannot say, okay, this exists. it has to go to the database, check to see if it exists, and then return the item to us if it does exist, or an error otherwise. So as you can see, this sort of makes sense, but the server doesn't know that the item exists. It has to do the full check, go to the database and check it. So to get an item, you don't have to have created the item before. We could just do the GET request, and then that would go to the database and see if the item is there. So it doesn't require the POST request to have happened before. Okay, so this is one example. Here's another example that is going to be really useful this section. Say a user logs into a web application, for example, Twitter. When we do that, the server responds with some data. And that data is going to be really important. That data is going to be unique to this user. And once it does that, the server doesn't know the user is logged in, since it doesn't have any state. So what do we do? Well, remember that piece of unique data the server returned when we logged in? The web application has to send that data every time it interacts with the server, so that the server can see, okay, I sent this data earlier, this user is indeed logged in, because that data is unique. And that data has to be sent in every request, or else the server won't be able to associate the request with the user. This authentication we're going to implement in this section, and everything is going to make a lot more sense. So if this is confusing, don't worry, because it is always confusing initially. The first time I learned about REST, I thought, what the hell is stateless? And it didn't really make sense for a long time. So don't worry if it is confusing. As I said, as we program the APIs, a lot of these things will make sense because they just do. So they'll come naturally to you. And always ask questions at any time. And I'm always available to help and guide you personally if you need anything. So don't doubt, go to the course Q&A and ask questions away if you need anything. So that's everything for this video. We've looked at REST and what it means, and essentially it means that we're now dealing with resources and we're dealing with stateless servers. So we're going to implement a REST API in this section, so I hope you enjoy that. And that's it for this video, so I'll see you on the next one.